First thing Jason forgot, we had a $500 gift certificate for anybody that sat in the front row, but it's now expired. So you guys sitting way in the back, $500 gone. You know, when you look at, whoops, go back. You know, we're trying to get to that perfect world, and there's other ways to prepare for this thing. And first is knowing what you have. I mean, when you look at that, you know, having the right spares, you know, standards and specifications, approved vendors, storage and maintenance practices, and then trending and tracking that data. I'm going to go into detail on each one of these. Do you really know what you have in your plant? Have you went out, surveyed, tagged, and identified every asset you have in your plant? Can I see hands that have done that? 2, maybe 1.5, 2. So we got a lot of people here, and so how do you know what you got to start with? So, you know, if you do know what you have, it definitely makes things a lot easier. We get calls all the time from customers that say, you know, something failed, and they have no data. They said it's a, you know, 150 horsepower motor. We go, well, you got to give us a little more information, and we get that all the time. So, you know, nowadays with lead times the way they are, you know, knowing what's special, having that in a database, knowing log and lead times, you can put that and understand how to adapt to that and get ready for that. Plus, once you have all the information, you can come up with the easy solutions, out-of-box solutions to those failures and be ready for them. And then where are you putting the data? Is it in a database? Is it on somebody's laptop? Is it a spreadsheet? Those are the things you need to look at. We have some of you saw this if you went to a presentation. We have a software package we developed called TrackRad, and it tracks any repairs that come into our facility, all the historical data that we have on that repair, all the paperwork, cause of failure, or at least looking at the causes of types of failures that could be occurring is all recorded in that database. So you can look up anything in there in seconds from your phone or from a computer. You know, having spares. Do you have spares? We went out and surveyed everything, but, you know, do you have spares? Show of hands of people that have some spares. Okay, I figured more people than one had spares. That's pretty common. But, you know, if you don't know what you have, especially with supply chain problems now, it can take weeks, days, even years to fix things. We were getting quoted on new product. If you're looking for a replacement, could be 2 years to get something. I'm sure you've seen it with other products. So, you know, when do you need spares and how do you do that? So, you know, how do you justify that? I get a lot of people, you know, repairs that come in, and we're going to talk about rush. You get a lot of people that go through and spend that 30, 40, 50% more to have something rushed. So how do I justify that to my management? You know, look at what it costs you per day to be down and calculate that out. How many days is it going to be? Is it going to be, you know, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is? It's really a lot easier to go justify that cost if you have information again. That's, again, doing the survey, gathering the information. As Jason said, the criticality, you know, sitting down, understanding what are the critical applications you have, and then do you have adequate spares to cover them? So, you know, what's that cost comparison to have that compared to not having it? And then what we find a lot of times is that when you look at your spares, if you are a multi-plant location or multi-operation where you have different production, a lot of times somebody's got the same spare in another area. It's like their firstborn. It's like, I'm not giving it up to that guy across the plant. This is mine, because I can sleep at night knowing that motor's there. I see looks, everybody does that. It's pretty common. And then you know, too many spares. That's something we find a lot. If you know, you go out there and you've identified you have some spares, but then you run into that time when you don't have enough of them. And how do you determine what is enough? Again, going back to that criticality, we have a report in our track rat system that takes the data that we gathered based on criticality, and you can set ratios in there. So do I need a 1 to 5, one spare to every 5 applications? 1 to 1? And what this does is it flags up the holes that you have in your database or in your spares to understand, I need to really focus on that. What's that cost? And you can put $1 to it now and have a way of doing that. I'll give you a real life example of having too many spares. We did back many years ago now, but we had a steel plant that we had 3 large complexes. We went out and surveyed almost 34,000 motors. Physically went out and surveyed 34,000 motors. It was about a 1.5-year process. It was a long process, but we did. We went every motor in there. And then when we got done, we pulled all their spares off site, and they had 11,000 spares. So now you have 1/3 of their motors were spares. So we start talking, and we go, all right, we're going to do an in-service to spares on the database. And when we did that, as you can see, almost 5,000 of them had no match to anything. I mean, if you're like most production areas, what happens? You change out a machine, but you kept your spare for the machine that you don't have anymore. And it doesn't work anywhere else, but you don't want to get rid of it because you haven't identified and you don't know if it works somewhere else. So people set on things. And so if you look at the cost of that reduction, that was 43% reduction in inventory. That was a $14 million savings for that company in inventory reduction. The other thing people don't take into consideration is the carrying cost to have inventory. There's 2 sides to that. If you talk to any purchasing or management, they're going, well, it costs too much money to maintain these things. And there is a cost to it. The average cost is about 13% per year. But us reducing that 5,000 motor inventory down saved them $1.8 million in carrying cost. So there's a give and take there. You got to look at both sides. Now we've surveyed everything. We know we have some spares. Hopefully we have the right spares, quantity-wise. Now you look at your standards. You know, we get calls all the time where a vendor or a customer calls and says, I got a broken piece of equipment. They say, what will it cost? And I go, what's wrong with it? I mean, to what standard do you want to, what's acceptable to you? How are we going to do that? And then what we find a lot of times too, I have to start with who's got specs? Who's got repair specs? Hands? So you don't know what your stuff's being repaired to. You have no clue. So you're dependent upon whoever's doing it to do a good job for you. So, if I was going to a doctor, I was getting a heart surgery, I'd sure check out who's doing it. I'd make sure I knew I had the best. So how you do that? I'm going to put some specs together for myself, the criteria that I want. That's your specifications, guys. I saw no hands. So you're having stuff repaired to what? So now how do you get, every repair vendor out there has a different way of doing something. They do whatever they want for you. There's hundreds of ways to do things. What's the correct way? Unless you have a spec, you'll never know that. And usually what you'll find is, and we see it a lot, is, it's really nice to have that annuity motor that fails every 6 months, 2 years. I'm getting it why would I make it better? That's crazy. That's what happens. They're not looking at it from a cost standpoint for you guys. They're looking at it from a dollar sense on their part. And we see it all the time. And so how do we stop that? My dad sat in the front row and he beaded it into us to lower the cost, keep lowering the cost, because the whole idea I look at from a philosophy of what we do for our customer is if I can lower your cost of doing business, you're going to be more competitive and you'll be here for the future. If I'm just spending your money and you're not helping you be more reliable, you're not going to be here in the future. So who am I going to do work for? The next guy that I can? So it's something we've had in our head forever. So I look at it, a repair isn't a repair, a replacement isn't a replacement. And again, replacement motors, you go to a motor catalog, you can buy anything you want. It'd be like buying a car. You want transportation, we all want transportation. You want to ride in luxury, or do you want to ride a car that gets you from point A to point B? There's some motors are the same way. What do you want? You going off-road? Can't take that, you go off-road. So, so without specifications, there's no way to do an apples-to-apples comparison. Going back to that question, you know, what's wrong with it? What's it going to cost? So we see it every day. Motors fail, and everybody wonders why, you know. And a lot of times we see the short-term solution. Your plant's down. Somebody needs it now. We run into this all the time where we say it's going to be, you know, a week to do it correctly. Guy goes, I don't have a week. You got to do it in 3 days. So we got to put pixie dust on it, and we hope that we can make it work and make it last. Well, guys, we stop and go, guys, we don't want to do that. Or if we're going to do it, we're going to do it with a plan to fix it right when you have the next shutdown, or a spare motor, or something's coming into place. Because you're going to get what anybody wants to give you. And if you look at that lifetime cost of that, it's well over 10 times the cost of not doing it right the first time. And the thing that always amazes me is that you don't have time to fix it right the first time, but you always have time to go down when it fails 3 months from now. Wow, all of a sudden you got time again because you were forced. That needs to change. You got to think longer term. So again, if you're looking at something being repaired, do you go with the cheapest solution to get you running, or would, you know, that's lasting 2 years? I could give you 100 examples of motors that we've repaired that somebody was getting 2 years out of. We determined what the problem was, and they're getting 15 now, but they were going with the low cost initially. So look at that when somebody comes with you with a solution and says, this might be 2 more days or 3 more days to do it right. Listen to them, please, because it's going to catch you somewhere along the way. And now we've done the survey, we got, you know, spares on the shelf. Now we got a spec we're all working from. Now you need to go out and kind of look at who's your vendors. Can they even meet your spec? You know, how many of you visited your vendor site besides everybody in here can go, wow, we had 100%. But you know what we find a lot is that you build a relationship with the guy that comes in or the gal that comes in. That's the starting point. But what we found, and I'll give a good example of this, we landed a steel mill many years ago, and I'd been the guy that went in there. They were having problems. They had multiple vendors. I sold them on equipment management concepts, specs, we were about 2 years into the program, and I kind of I went into the guy, and the guy was a really rough, gruff guy. And I sat down with him. We were kind of doing a review of stuff, and I said, his name was Bill, and I said, Bill, I have to come clean with you. I said, we don't have a repair shop. I broker all this work out. I've just got lucky. Nobody screwed anything up. And he looked at me, he said some choice words I'm not going to repeat. And I said, I'm just kidding. But the reality is, he had never come to our shop. Didn't know. He did at my face value. Now, I'm a nice-looking guy, I think. These guys, never mind, I'm not going there. Last night we had a conversation. I'm not going there. But, you know, do you really know who's doing your work, or do you like that person coming in? Should have a combination of both, don't get me wrong. But who's really doing the work? You know, you met a lot of guys. You saw the guys and gals in our company. That's the people doing the work. So trust that. And then how do you audit them? You know, how do you go out and make sure that they're meeting your standards? And then what kind of forms are you using? Hopefully your standards and your documentation has some type of standardized form. If you look up here, some of you went through the tour today. We use tablets. I don't know if everybody showed you that, but we use tablets, and all this data is on tablets now. So is it a written down measurement, or is it good or bad? Because that's what you find a lot of times is people just go through a checklist and, okay, that shaft's good because the bearing came off of it hard. That's not the answer. The answer is measure it so that later on, that's valuable data for you in the future. And then the other side of this is if you have a spec, we run by our own spec internally, but then we look at what the customer has as a spec and we do an exception report. So we're verifying that what you want is probably different than what we're going to provide you. Not a lot, but you might have a different vibration spec you want to work by, or you want that motor painted green and we paid them gray. So how do you know that that's being done? We validate it by having an exception report that is the exceptions over our standards. And then what are you doing from a failure assessment? You know, are they giving you information? I've talked to a lot of people here recently, and we talked about bearings. That's a common thing. Everybody goes, the bearing failed. No, that was what happened because something else caused it. You know, grease, misalignment, contamination, whatever it is. So what are you doing to really start to solve problems? And then if you want to go to the full extent of a really detailed program, again, we talked about spares, we talked about standards, we've got qualified vendors, we've surveyed everything. We've got a customer that we actually, as a motor comes back to one of our warehouses, we have a test stand like you saw at our shop today. We test run the motor at that site and verify even our motors that come in, we test run them to verify that those motors are good. My phone's ringing right now, which it shouldn't be. So, you know, that's the extreme, but it's something that this happened to be one of the guys, a couple guys that were here today. That's their company, and they said that justified the cost because even the best vendors can make mistakes. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. And now they are assured. Plus, we test run all their critical motors once a year. We do a test run on. So now they have no thought of a motor going to them that's not going to run properly. They know for sure. So it's something that, you know, you can look at. It's extreme. That's like the ultimate. And then you start looking at, all right, we got great vendors repairing stuff. How are we installing them? You know, you have your own maintenance team. Some people use a combination, you know, outside vendors and your own maintenance team. You know, do they really know how to properly install it? I mean, we get a lot of motors that somebody's lifted and dropped and broke it, and they ask us to piece it back together. That happens all the time. They didn't have a good lifting plan. They didn't really know what they were doing. Alignment, this is a good one. You know, everybody now has laser alignments, and I love it when we go and say, well, the failure looks like it was a misalignment. The guy goes, no, I had a smiley face on my alignment machine that said it was okay. If you don't know what you're doing, you can get any type of reading you want. So have some experience, train your people to understand how to do that properly. Balancing on site from, you know, brush maintenance to greasing. Greasing is a big one. You got the ultrasound guys here. That's the ultimate way of doing something, making sure that you're not over lubricating something. And then who's doing your on-site repairs? Do they have the capabilities, or are they just hammer mechanics? Somebody with a hammer and a wrench, and they're getting it out of there. That happens every day. So are you prepared to do that? And is it being done properly? So the other side is we get run into this. We're trying, you know, we're an investigator when a motor comes in. It's like a CSI. I always think of it as like CSI. You know, we got one piece of the puzzle, and that's what we're really doing, is trying to puzzle the pieces together. When you're pulling something out, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle. It's like the investigation. You know, don't touch anything until we get here, because you want to see what the condition was when it failed. And so that information hardly ever gets back to us. I mean, was the base bad? Was the German machine broke? You know, something in the German machine went bad? You know, that information needs to get back. It's so valuable for the repair vendor to do the right job for you. They need that information. And then, you know, we get it with base issues all the time. We identified the base, but they're not fixing it. We take the new motor back. They go, oh yeah, we need to fix that. We don't have time now. So we put the new motor that's just been repaired on a bad base. Guaranteed it's going to fail quicker than the old motor did. So it's those things you really have to look at. And I know it's not easy. You're going to production, you're going to management, they're going, I don't care. You go, then you fix it. Because at that point, it's not going to last. Or at least send them an email that says, this was my recommendation, so you got something in writing. Because it's going to happen. So now we've surveyed everything. We got good vendors. We're getting stuff repaired. You got that warm and fuzzy feeling that everything's perfect. But do you really have a good spare? I'll give you an example of an automotive plant that was here in Kalamazoo that's not here anymore. When I was young in the business, I delivered some picked up some repair motors, and it was a press motor. Pick it up, take it to the shop. We'd start rush repairing it. Perfect timing. And we did. We said it was going to happen somewhere. But anyways, there's probably not even a train. Somebody's just hitting a horn. But this automotive plant, I'd pick up the motor, bring it back to the shop, we'd rush repair it, and then like a day later, I'd pick up another one just like it, and like 2 days later, I'd pick up another one. And I'm like, wow, now everything's emergency. They're shut down. Everybody's panicking. Well, nobody looked at why it failed. They're just panicking and they need to get it back running. Well, so I started doing a little bit of research, and as I started talking to people at the plant, I started going, guys, where do you store your spares? Guy goes, we store them right by the press in the basement. So I go down into the basement. There was at least that much grease on the floor, literally that much grease. The press motor that originally was in service is right here, and there's the spare right next to it, and all you heard was boom, 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 boom. And that motor sat there. That motor was in worse shape, because at least the one running, spinning bearings, it was terrible. And so by just so we talked to the upper management. We said, hey, let us start an equipment management system for you. And got them talked into it. They were spending $500,000 a year in motor repair. In less than 2 years, we brought it down to $150,000. Less than 2 years. By just spares alone. So, you know, they didn't really have a spare. They had the illusion of a spare. So, do you really know where your spares are? I mean, quick can you answer yes to each one of these questions? Do you know where your spares are? There's one, that's good. You know the condition of your spares. That's good, 1. And are you confident in installing those spares? 3. Same person though. So she gets a A and everybody else is on it. That's perfect though. At least you're on that path. You're on the right path. So right there tells you something, isn't it? You can do all the predictive, preventative, everything you want to do, but if you're not looking at what's being installed, I can tell you they're going to fail quicker than they should be. Here's some pictures of stuff that we've had over time. And there's worse ones than these. I can tell you that I probably didn't take pictures of, but this looks like most people's spares. They have them tucked in a corner somewhere, shelf here, shelf there. There's usually other equipment on the shelves with them, but these are actual examples. And then everybody walked through here. Would you prefer this type of storage, or would you prefer the other type of storage? So, you know, which one do you trust more? And then the next side is, okay, let's say you did identify you have spares, you got them consolidated, got them in a spot, and now what's the condition of them? So we do a quantify and qualify type thing when we take over somebody's spares to get a baseline. So we bring them in here. The first thing we do is we do a visual inspection, then we turn shafts, we listen for noise, we look at the condition of the motor, and if we have questions about it, we mark it down to say possible test run or more assessment needs to be done. So at least you know the spares you have are in good condition, because I think probably I've talked to many maintenance people, and what's the motor they pull off the shelf? They got 5 of the same ones. They pull the most recent repair because it's the cleanest and looks the best. But the one way in the back that's been sitting there for 20 years, oh, they still have a spare though, but it's way in the back, and I guarantee it's not going to last, and it happens every day. So what do you do if you do have spares? Who's turning shafts? Anybody turning shafts on their spares? One again. You're doing really good. Okay. Nothing else. You know, if you have heaters, if you don't have a controlled heated warehouse, we'd recommend on at least the larger stuff, put, you know, hook heaters up, let it sit there. You know, who's measure checking their motor? You know, you're probably doing it before you install it, I hope. Because I know a lot of people don't. They get it all hooked up, get ready, push the button, and it doesn't work, or it blows up. So, you know, at least measure check them on a regular basis, you know, at least quarterly. And then where are you storing them? You saw the condition of some of these. Are you storing them in a controlled, heated, you know, clean warehouse, rodent control? That's a hard one, but are you? Probably not. And then what are you doing with the records? You know, we talked about track rat and the data, so. And then manufacturers talk about oil filling and doing things like that. You know, it's like every manual, at least if you're a guy like me, you throw that manual in a box somewhere, you don't need it. But there's a lot of good data in there. Now, we got all this stuff done. Now, what are we doing with the information? Because that's really where we started. We had information from a predictive, preventative, that type of thing. Now, what are we doing with the historical data of the motor? You know, are you really tracking what you should be tracking? Are you taking a long-term approach, looking at, you know, something to last for a long time? Another example, you know, are you keeping all your information? Well, we find a lot of times when we send a report to this email, be it a maintenance manager, reliability manager, he stored it in his computer somewhere. He's got it. Nobody else has access to it, but he's got it, or it goes in a filing cabinet. Example of a customer many years ago that we did a motor management program with. They had a guy that was the guru. He was the motor guy. Really good at what he was doing. You walk in his office, like 5 filing cabinets. Every application history was in there. He could pull it out in seconds. He knew everything about everything. He passed away. They went into his office and threw all that stuff away. So it happens every single day unless you have somewhere to keep that where everybody has access to it. It drives me insane that we really don't share that information to the next generation. We're not giving up. It's like we're holding it because I'm protecting my job. I don't want anybody else to know. But in reality, how do we get better? Share the information, have it in somewhere that everybody has access to so we can start looking at what's happening. So when you look at that, our track wrap system has that capabilities with a dashboard. And looking at time, we're doing okay. I'm going to kind of move through this, but some of you went to that class probably, but it breaks it down into types of failures. And then what you do is you can keep drilling down, and we can do it by number of units or cost. Cost is one that usually people want to deal with. So we can start breaking down. If you look at this one, electrical, they spent $500,000 in electrical failures. So then you start drilling that down and you say, okay, looks like grounded situation's the worst one. And as you keep drilling down, you can pinpoint what's causing it. And so we can start to determine things that we can do to stop those things from occurring. I'll give you one quick example, I know we're time-wise, is with this data, we were able to identify an area where they had over-lubrication. We were seeing, I mean, you couldn't even get the motors apart. They were stuck. The rotors were stuck inside of them. We kind of broke it down in the database, and because we can do it by application area, we found that half of the plant had a really good lubrication. I mean, no problems, failures. This half had a really bad one. So we went to the plant, they had 2 different lubrication guys. Okay, we're drilling down, we're getting to the answer. The guy who did it right had years of experience, pumped in the right amount of grease, did a great job. The other guy was a young guy, and his rule of thumb, never trained, his rule of thumb was for every horsepower was 1 pump of grease. So he had big forearms. But I mean, literally, he would pump, if he had 100 horsepower, it'd be 100 pumps of grease. This is a true story, 100 pumps of grease. It was insane. But that's how simple it was to identify what the problem was and fix it. I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
So, as you heard Mark, I mean, we talked earlier when I was up talking about what you do with the data. Mark's talking about what you do with the data. He talked about, hey, auditing your vendors and that. The same thing holds true for your predictive programs, your preventive maintenance programs. Run audits on them. Make sure you are doing what is best in practice now. May have been best in practice 20 years ago, but make sure it's getting up to date. That same philosophy applies to everything here. So kind of wrapping it up is like seeing the whole picture, that's the whole thing we talked about, becoming holistic. It's making sure we don't have each of our things in their own silos, is making sure are we communicating? And that's what we talked about. That's kind of getting into this perfect world. But I'll be honest, I mean, nobody even we deal with is in this perfect world. There's some people who are further along in the journey than others, but most of the time, the PDM groups don't know what's going on, what PMs were done, what repairs were going on, and what was those results. Preventive maintenance departments don't know if the PDM group has flagged anything as an issue, hasn't looked to say, well, hey, should we pull that PM up? They're not communicating. And then getting down to storeroom and storage vendors don't know enough in advance, that they actually need to get an asset in, and when it's going to be needed. So it's taking everything and starting to look at it. This is what we're saying is kind of the journey. You got to have these foundational items in. And again, what's the first one up there? Surveys completed and asset criticality is established. Mark talked about doing the surveys. Yeah, we're great at motors, but it goes to everything. Pumps. You can survey and store and know your spares for pumps. You can have replacement fans, shafts. We talked a lot about motors, but this goes to all your equipment in your plant. But again, understanding the criticality of what you need and then saying, okay, we've done that. What is the stuff that should be run to failure? What's the stuff that should be in a PM? What's the stuff that should be in PDM or your remote condition monitoring? Now we've got that done. And do we have PDM and PMs that are established and completed? How many plants have PMs and you get to the end of the month and you're supposed to have done 50 PMs and you got to 40. But somebody says, okay, that's good enough, but that's 10 PMs that weren't done. Same thing with PDM. How many guys are out there and it says that they have a work order comes up and says, I'm supposed to go perform this route on the coal handling unit. Well, I just got busy this month. I'm short-handed. The boss me know this. I didn't get it done. It's making sure you're actually knowing you have those done, knowing you have them, and then actually getting them done. Spending the time and resources. If they're not getting done, maybe you haven't done the right criticality. Maybe you're saying it's not really that critical. So adjusting it. And then the same thing we talked about earlier. The results of the PDM and PMs are used to adjust the schedule and priorities of it. Specifications, standards are created, and you got that 80% of your work is being followed by that. It's not something you're going to have everything, every little detail, but most of your work should have some kind of specification to it. Vibration has that, motor repair has it, pump repairs have it. So do you have those specifications in that everybody's following? Approved vendors established and performing work. And then applying, spares in place, applicable spares are in place and maintained properly. Again, we talked about the motors, but again, it goes to everything else. Pump shafts, you don't think they need to be spun? Same thing as a motor. They need to be spun. Otherwise, you're going to put it in, and you're going to have that pump that fails. So I mean, hopefully, through all this last day, and people who've been here for the last several years, hopefully this is helping you get on this path and helped you see that there's a better solution and a way to go. Again, we want you to get to this holistic approach for your equipment management. And I said, the whole idea is, kind of once you get there, with that holistic approach, you should be able to do three things better. You should see what's going on in your plant, what's going on with your machines, what can be done, to prevent these issues coming up. Now that you've seen them, can you get rid of those issues? That's what Mark was saying. Can you spend the time, instead of living with every 2 years replacing something, well, figure out, dig down, start looking, what's that root cause? Can we make it last longer? And that's what we said. The last part is stop that issue from happening again. Now that we've identified it, go in and make the actual appropriate repairs and fixes. Don't just put a Band-Aid on it. Take care of it so it's not happening again. Again, it's leading down there. This creates that peace of mind and confidence that your equipment will operate effectively, have longevity, and reduce total cost of ownership. And I said, this is a journey. It's going to take time and resources. It's not quick. But once you get there, it's like hitting the easy button. When it comes to your facility's reliability, which is the ultimate goal. We said, ultimate goal is reliability. Reliability is that increased runtime, increased production, and increased profits. And who doesn't want to come back to their bosses and say, hey, we're going to make more money this year. And now that I helped you do that, can I get my bonus?